The FIFA World Cup is hands down the greatest sporting event in the world. Throughout its history, 79 nations have taken part, and in the last World Cup alone, over 5 billion people tuned in to watch it, which is over 60% of the entire planet. But the story of the World Cup is even crazier than you could imagine. It's one full of controversy, politics, passion, and love for the beautiful game. So, this is the entire history of the World Cup.
Laura Pereira hit by Hammers! Oh, what a goal! Surely now, Spain have won the World Cup.
Argentina campeón del mundo! Argentina campeón del mundo!
This story begins almost 100 years ago, before the World Cup was even an idea, because in 1914, FIFA decided to recognize the Olympics as the Football World Championship, meaning the country that won the Olympic football tournament would be crowned as the world champions. And it stayed this way for over 20 years, until the 28th of May 1928, when FIFA President Jules Rimet had a golden idea that would shape the future of football forever. After seeing the global rise in popularity for this sport and the major success of the Olympic football tournaments, he wanted FIFA to stage its own international tournament outside of the Olympics, which is how the idea of the World Cup was born. And within just 2 years, this idea was turned into reality, as the first ever World Cup was hosted in 1930. This World Cup would take place in Uruguay, as they were the current world champions, having won the previous Olympic tournament. Now, the location of this tournament proved to be problematic for the European countries, as there was a long journey by ship, and Europe was going through a financial crisis at the time, so most nations couldn't afford the trip over. This first edition was attended by a total of 13 countries, 2 from North America, 4 from Europe, and 7 from South America. Egypt were set to be the only African team taking part, but due to bad weather, their ship had to be delayed and they missed the tournament. Japan and Thailand were the 2 Asian countries invited, but both withdrew leading up to the tournament, so on the 13th of July 1930, the first ever World Cup kicked off as 13 countries battled to be crowned the champions of the world. The format was similar to what we see today, with 4 groups, and the winners of each group making their way to the semifinals for a knockout match. The final saw the hosts Uruguay face off against Argentina, and Uruguay defeated them 4-2 with 93,000 spectators in the stadium to be crowned the first ever World Cup champions, and they were handed the original trophy, which was different from what we see today. Now moving on to 4 years later, the next World Cup was set to take place in Italy, making it fair for the Europeans, with the idea that the competition would alternate between Europe and South America. This time round, there was interest from enough countries to host a qualification stage, which saw 16 nations qualify for the finals, and this would be the same format used until the expansion in 1982. Uruguay, who were the title holders, were still upset at the lack of attendance from European countries, so they boycotted the tournament, meaning there was sure to be a new champion. Egypt became the first African team to take part, but were knocked out by Hungary in the first round. The final this year saw Italy face off against Czechoslovakia, where the game was decided in extra time, as Italy won the game 2-1, making them Europe's first ever champions. Now roll on 4 more years, and France hosts the 1938 World Cup, which was controversial as it went against the agreement to alternate between South America and Europe, meaning both Argentina and Uruguay boycotted the competition this time round. This tournament only saw 15 nations competing, as in the build-up to it, Austria was absorbed by Germany in the early stages of the war. Italy yet again made it to the final, and this time comfortably beat Hungary 4-2 to make it their second World Cup in a row. Now, after 3 successful World Cups in a row, the world was well and truly hooked, and we're excited for the next tournament to come. But unfortunately, it's a bit difficult to host a World Cup when there's a world war going, so fans and players would have to wait 12 years for the great tournament to return, but believe me, it was going to return in style. Come 1950, and the World Cup would return to South America as Brazil hosted it this time round, and the world was about to witness the biggest and best tournament yet. India refused to play in this edition after they were told they couldn't play barefoot. Yes, really. Italy, who were the current world champions, were a shock entry because 2 years prior, the Torino air disaster caused the death of a number of national team players. This year was also the first time that British nations joined the party, as they had refused to join FIFA prior to this for political reasons. The final saw Uruguay defeat the hosts Brazil to win their second and final World Cup in a packed-out Maracana with 173,000 spectators, which to this day is still the most viewed World Cup final ever. This tournament saw the Brazilian legend Leonidas take home the Golden Boot as he finished as the tournament's top scorer. But now moving on to 1954, this World Cup was hosted in Switzerland and was the highest scoring tournament ever. This was also the first tournament to be properly televised, meaning the World Cup finally became a global phenomenon as fans could finally watch from all over the planet. In the quarterfinals, Austria knocked out the hosts Switzerland in a thriller of a match, finishing 7-5, which to this day remains the highest scoring World Cup match ever. Hungary finished the tournament as the highest scoring nation with a total of 27 goals thanks to icons like Ferenc Puskás and Sando Kostic, and it looked like they were going to win the whole tournament, especially after going 2 goals up in 10 minutes in the final. But West Germany had different plans for this game. They clawed back from a 2-0 deficit to triumph against the Hungarians, finishing the game with 3-2, with Helmut Rahn scoring the winner in probably the most iconic game in German football history. The Germans remember this day as the Miracle of Bern, and this final really was great, but it wasn't the greatest final ever because we still need to get to that. And not only because we still have 18 World Cups to talk about, and we're going to discuss the cheating scandal that saw Argentina lift the World Cup, the football player who was killed for scoring an own goal, and we're even going to talk about the future of the World Cup because from 2026, the tournament is going to change forever. But before we get to all that, all I ask is that you subscribe to the channel. It would really mean the world to me if you would join the Top Bins family. But anyway, now it's time to talk about the first sighting of the World Cup's greatest ever player, Pelé. 1958 saw Sweden host the World Cup, which meant that, yet again, it was held in Europe twice in a row, and the rest of the world were not happy. So, FIFA decided that this would be the last time this would ever happen, and from the next tournament, they made the rotation between continents an official rule. We also saw a certain 17-year-old Brazilian by the name of Pelé make his mark on world football by lighting up the tournament. He scored in all of Brazil's knockout games, including a brace in the final, as Brazil beat Sweden 5-2 in a comfortable victory, meaning Pelé claimed the first of 3 World Cup trophies. Alongside Pelé was Brazilian teammate Zagallo, who would go on to make history by becoming the first person to win the World Cup as a player, and then, 12 years later, as the coach of Brazil. As much as Pelé stole the headlines, there was a French striker who made history this tournament by the name of Jules Fontaine, as he scored 13 goals in a single tournament, which meant he averaged more than 2 goals a game, which is a record that is still yet to be broken. But anyway, on to 1962, hosted in Chile, where Brazil went back-to-back to win their second World Cup trophy, beating Czechoslovakia in the final. The fact that this World Cup even took place was a shock because just 2 years before, there were major earthquakes in Chile, meaning the entire infrastructure for this tournament had to be rebuilt, but somehow they managed just in the nick of time. Now, although Brazil won the tournament, their star man Pelé underperformed due to injuries, but luckily they had other stars like Vava and Garrincha who were able to lead them to glory. But Pelé wasn't the only underperforming star, because the Soviet Union goalkeeper Lev Yashin, who was one of the best players in the world at the time, also came under a lot of scrutiny for poor performances. This World Cup as a whole was often scrutinized for defensive and even violent tactics at times, which probably reached its peak in a first-round game that is is now remembered as the Battle of Santiago. In the build-up to this game, the Italian press wrote very unflattering articles about Chile, who were hosting the World Cup, which led to an angry team on the pitch, and that could be seen with the amount of deliberate tackles and genuine attempts to hurt each other during the game. Chile won the game 2-0, but Italy had 2 red cards and had to be escorted off the pitch by police just to keep safe. Now, moving on to 1966. Football came home for the first time as England lifted the trophy in a thriller of a final. England beat out West Germany 4-2 by scoring 2 goals in extra time thanks to a final hat-trick from Jeff Hurst and stellar performances from players like Bobby Charlton and Gordon Banks. But the best player of the tournament wasn't even in the final, because that was probably the Portuguese icon Eusebio, who finished as the tournament's top scorer. This World Cup was also hosted in England and was the first time the tournament made use of an official logo and a mascot. North Korea became the first Asian team to reach the quarterfinals as they beat out Italy in the process, and South Africa was banned from the World Cup for the next 26 years for breaching anti-discrimination policies. But now we're moving into 1970, hosted in Mexico, making this the first North American tournament. Brazil won their 3rd World Cup in 4 tournaments, making this Pele's 3rd trophy. This was also under the management of Zagallo, who won it as a player 16 years before, making him the first man to achieve that feat. The final saw Brazil breeze past Italy, winning the game 4-1. And this tournament is also remembered for the semi-final match between West Germany and Italy, which saw 5 goals scored in extra time and had Franz Beckenbauer play the match with a broken arm because Germany ran out of substitutes. But unfortunately, his efforts were in vain as Germany got knocked out even despite having the top scorer of the tournament on their side, Gerd Müller. But Germany wasn't worried because 4 years later, they were hosting the World Cup and they were back with a vengeance as they beat out the Netherlands 2-1 to lift the World Cup trophy. This Dutch side revolutionized world football with their total football philosophy, with their main man Johan Cruyff at the center of it all, but they just didn't have enough in them to beat out this iconic German side with Gerd Müller and Franz Beckenbauer 4 years better than the previous final defeat. This was also the hardest World Cup to actually qualify for, especially for the European teams, because England and Italy were placed in the same qualifying group, meaning only one of the 2 previous world champions were going to make the tournament, and despite winning 5 out of 6 of their qualifying games, England just missed out on it. But somehow, qualifying actually got even harder the next time around because there were a record 95 teams trying to qualify for 14 available spots, since the previous winners and the host automatically qualified. And this tournament was hosted in Argentina, where yet again the hosts lifted the trophy as they beat the Dutch in the final 3-1 with 2 extra time goals, making this the Netherlands' 2nd final defeat in a row and making total football feel like a total failure. Mario Kempes was the star man for Argentina, picking up the Golden Boot with a total of 6 goals throughout the tournament. This edition also saw 2 first-time participants in Iran and Tunisia's win against Mexico made them the first African team to ever win a World Cup match. But this would be the last World Cup where so few teams would qualify, because in 1982, the tournament was expanded to 24 teams, meaning more countries would be allowed the chance to fight for international glory. And this tournament was hosted in Spain, but the expansion caused for a slight format change. The 24 qualified teams were split into 6 groups of 4, where the top 2 teams of each group would be placed in the second round. They would then play in another group stage, where they were split into 4 groups of 3. The winners of these 4 groups would be placed in the semifinals, and then it would be a 2-rounded knockout with the semifinals and the final. A bit confusing, but I hope it made sense. But anyway, with the 8 extra slots, we saw 5 new first-time participants in Cameroon, Algeria, Honduras, New Zealand, Zealand and Kuwait, and we also saw a record match in the group stage as Hungary beat El Salvador 10-1, which to this day is still the biggest winning margin in World Cup history. The great Paolo Rossi was the star man of this tournament as he scored a hat-trick against Brazil to help guide Italy to the final against West Germany, which Italy managed to win 3-1. Now, after one edition with that format, they scrapped it for the 1986 World Cup hosted in Mexico. They decided to replace the second group stage with an extra knockout round, meaning it was now the initial group stage, then a 16-team knockout till the final. Jose Batista broke records in this tournament by becoming the fastest player to get a red card in history by getting sent off after just 56 seconds for Uruguay against Scotland. This year, Argentina won the tournament thanks to both the brilliance and the cheating of Diego Maradona as they beat West Germany 3-2 in the final. But the real controversy came in the quarterfinal match between England and Argentina, where two of the most iconic goals in World Cup history were scored by Maradona. The first was a clear handball goal, which the referee just didn't see. And the second was what is described as the goal of the century as he dribbled past five English players from half pitch before putting the ball in the net. Despite being so wrongfully knocked out in the quarterfinals, Gary Lineker still took home the Golden Boot with 6 goals for the tournament, but surely that wouldn't have been enough for him to forget that controversial hand of God. But in 1990, the major controversy actually happened in the qualifying stage of the World Cup, because the Chilean goalkeeper Roberto Rojas got banned for life and got Chile banned from the World Cup. Chile faced Brazil in a crucial qualifying match when Rojas saw a flare thrown onto the pitch. He took this as an opportunity to fall to the ground and cut himself with a blade that he hid in his gloves to make it look like the flare hit him. If the flare actually did hit him and was thrown by the Brazilian fans, Brazil would have been disqualified. But unfortunately for Rojas, one photographer was able to pick this all up on camera, meaning he got caught and was banned for life from the World Cup, and Chile were banned from this tournament. But now let's get to what actually happened in this tournament hosted by Italy. Well, yet again, we saw West Germany face off against Argentina in the final, but this time West Germany did enough to seal the victory, winning 1-0. This was the lowest scoring tournament ever, but two players did steal the hearts of world football, being Italy's Salvatore Schillaci, who won the Golden Boot, and England's Paul Gascoigne, who played with magic in his feet. Cameroon were also the first African nation to reach the quarterfinals as African football continued to rise in strength, but still couldn't match the Europeans or the South Americans. Now moving on to 1994, this was hosted in the United States and became the most viewed World Cup in history, with a total attendance of 3.6 million spectators live in the stadiums, and quite a lot happened this year. After the group stage, Diego Maradona tested positive for drug usage and was banned mid-tournament, which left a gaping hole in the Argentina team, and they got knocked out in the first game without him. The Russian player Oleg Solenko became the first player to score 5 goals in a World Cup match against Cameroon, and in that same game, Roger Milla scored Cameroon's only goal, making him the oldest goal scorer in World Cup history at 42 years old. The final this year saw Brazil face off against Italy. After 90 minutes, the score was 0-0. Then, after another 30 minutes, the score remained the same. This was the only final to ever finish goalless and the first final to be decided with a penalty shootout, which Brazil won 3-2. Romario was awarded the Golden Ball for being the best player at the tournament, but the Golden Boot was shared between Stoichkov and Solenko with 6 goals each. But the real controversy and heartbreak of this tournament happened with the Colombian national team because Andres Escobar was killed for his performances. The Colombian team was seen to be their golden generation, and the entire country was expecting strong performances. At this time, Colombia was not in a good place as the country was controlled by gangs and the cartels, so this World Cup was a shining light for the nation. Colombia got knocked out in the group stages, and the critical moment was an own goal by the captain Andres Escobar against USA. Upon his return home to Colombia, he went to a bar, and as he left the bar, he was shot and killed for his own goal, marking a dark day in the history of the World Cup. It was alleged that this was an organized hit by the cartels, who were angry at the captain as they had placed big bets on the Colombian team and were angry at him for their loss, but that hasn't been confirmed. But despite such a tragedy, football lives on, and Colombia did actually qualify for the next World Cup in 1998, hosted in France, but yet again got knocked out in the group stage. Thankfully, this time round, there were no tragedies associated with the early exit. But this World Cup did also see a shift in the format once again, because we finally got the expansion to 32 teams, which is the format we know today, and for the last time in 2022. This expansion also now allowed for 2 countries from the same continent to be placed in the same group together. This tournament saw Lothar Matthäus play, which was a record-breaking moment as he became the player with the most World Cup appearances in history, with 25 across 5 separate tournaments. This year's final saw Brazil face off against France, with each team having arguably one of the 2 best players in the world at the time, being Zidane for France and Ronaldo Nazario for Brazil. A couple hours before the final, Ronaldo Nazario suffered seizures, which should have ruled him out of the game, but he controversially was placed in the starting 11. His performance was a shadow of the player we saw throughout the entire tournament, and on the other hand, Zidane showed up, scoring 2 goals in the final to win France their first ever World Cup. This French team also had Didier Deschamps playing, who would go on to become the second person to win as a player and then as a manager 20 years on from this tournament. But anyway, despite this loss to France, Brazil would be back and back stronger, because they didn't come to take part, they came to take over. This was the first World Cup hosted in Asia and was split between South Korea and Japan. Brazil were even better than they were last time, with a front 3 known as the 3 Rs for Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, and Rivaldo. This front 3 helped Brazil storm the tournament as they beat Germany 2-0 in the final. Ronaldo Nazario picked up the Golden Boot, but the Golden Ball award for best player was handed to the German goalkeeper Oliver Kahn. South Korea became the best performing Asian nation in history as they reached the semi-finals, which was a great achievement for a smaller footballing nation. But now, roll the clock to 2006, and Germany were hosting this tournament. Ronaldo Nazario became the greatest goal scorer in the history of the competition by scoring his 15th World Cup goal, breaking the record for the most goals in history. This year was a brutal one, with the most yellow cards ever in a tournament, with a total of 345 cards, and the brutality this year was epitomized in a match between Portugal and Netherlands, which is now known as the Battle of Nuremberg, as there were a total of 4 red cards, making that the most cards ever in a single match. This was also the first of 5 World Cups that both Messi and Ronaldo would take part in, but neither really tore it up. This year's drama all came in the final matchup between Italy and France, where Zinedine Zidane was truly on smoke. He scored a Panenka penalty off the crossbar to show he had nerves of steel. And then, with 10 minutes to go in extra time, with the score tied at 1, he headbutted Marco Materazzi for insulting his sister, which caused him to get sent off. The game went to penalties, and thanks to the heroics of Gianluigi Buffon, Italy managed to lift their 4th World Cup trophy, whilst Zidane walked away with a silver medal, a red card, the Player of the Tournament award, and probably a bruised head. Now, from one dramatic final to another, 2010 saw Spain in the peak of their golden era as they lifted the trophy with a 116th minute winner for Andres Iniesta to allow Spain to lift their first and only ever World Cup. They defeated the Netherlands in the final, which made this their 3rd final defeat without a victory. They're like an international Tottenham Hotspur, bottling it every time. This tournament was hosted in South Africa, making it the first one in the continent, and North Korea also made history by conceding 16 goals in 3 games, being the most a country has ever conceded in the competition. But if there's one thing that stands out from this tournament, it's not the players or the coaches, but it's the football. The Jabulani was the football created for this tournament and was considered as the ball from hell. It was unpredictable and erratic for players, and they hated it. But this just added more drama and excitement, and from a viewer's point of view, it was beautiful to watch, making it the most iconic football ever. But now we're off to Brazil for the 2014 World Cup, where history repeated itself in the final. 0-0 for 90 minutes, and then with a couple minutes to spare, Mario Götze crops up and scores the winner to sink Argentina and stop Messi from winning the World Cup. Messi still walked away with the golden ball for being the best player in the tournament. Neuer was the star man for Germany, walking away with the golden glove, and James Rodriguez was the new kid on the block, picking up the golden boot as he did wonders for Colombia. Miroslav Klose overtook Ronaldo Nazario as the World Cup's leading goal scorer by scoring his 16th goal of the tournament. Goal line technology was introduced, which would finally erase that margin of error from linesmen and referees, but probably the most memorable moment of this tournament was the semi-final between Germany and Brazil. Brazil were the host and were one of the favorites to go all the way and win the competition, especially with Neymar on their side. When it came to the semi-final, Neymar picked up an injury and had to miss the game, but even without their best player, nobody expected the game to turn out how it did, because Germany put 7 goals past Brazil in one of the most embarrassing defeats in Brazilian football history. But now we're getting closer and closer to the present day and talking about the future of the competition. But first, we're talking about the 2018 World Cup hosted in Russia. England had a great run this time round, making their way to the semi-finals, and they thought it was finally coming home again. It did not, in fact, come home, as Croatia knocked them out to make the final as real underdogs. Harry Kane still did pick up the Golden Boot award, but that wasn't the prize he was after. Video assistant referee debuted in this tournament, which resulted in a record number of penalties being given as football leans more and more into new technology for better or for worse, and the Egyptian goalkeeper Essam El Hadari became the oldest football player to take part in a World Cup at 45 years old. But now, let's talk about the final. France were the clear favorites coming up against the underdogs Croatia, who had an inspiring run to the final, thanks in particular to the brilliance of their little magician Luka Modric. France won the game 4-2 to lift their second World Cup 20 years on from their first, and managed by Didier Deschamps, who played in the first World Cup victory. After this tournament, the name on everyone's lips was the young kid who tore it up, named Kylian Mbappe, who would do the same thing in Qatar 4 years later. 2022 became the first World Cup hosted in a Middle Eastern country and was hosted in December in order to compensate for the extreme temperatures. Since Qatar didn't have the stadium set up from before, they practically built every stadium from scratch, and despite some serious controversy in the ethics of these stadiums, I have to admit they look beautiful. This tournament saw both Messi and Ronaldo make history, but in very different ways. Cristiano Ronaldo became the most substituted player in the history of the World Cup, having now been subbed off a total of 11 times across his 5 World Cup campaigns. And then, as I'm sure you know, Lionel Messi finally lifted the World Cup trophy in what was the greatest final football has ever seen. A 3-3 thriller between France and Argentina that took the game all the way to penalties. Kylian Mbappe scored a final hat-trick, finishing as the tournament's top scorer, but this still wasn't enough. Heroics from Martinez throughout the game and then during the penalty shootout are what spurred Argentina on to lift the most recent edition of the World Cup. Now, what's next for the World Cup? The 2026 tournament will be hosted in North America and shared between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. This World Cup will see an expansion from 32 teams to 48 teams, who will be placed into 12 groups of 4, where 2 teams will qualify from each group to form a knockout stage, and then the 8 so-called best performers who finish third in the groups will also join this 32-team knockout stage, meaning more games and more drama for fans. Who do I think will win it? But if Harry Kane has managed to get all the Spurs out of him by then, I'd say England. But over a decade at Spurs is hard to shake, so I'd go with Brazil in that case, with the likes of Endrick, Vinny Jr., and Rodrigo all young and fired up. Now, after 22 World Cups, Brazil remains the only nation to play in every single World Cup. Klose sits on the top of the all-time scorer chart, but Kylian Mbappe is only 4 goals away from that, so it's likely he's going to overtake it. And there's just a chance that Ronaldo stays playing long enough to make his 6th World Cup and have one last go at completing football. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then I can guarantee you'll enjoy the one on screen now. You should really click on it. Trust me.